Okay, so getting back and forth between Rhino and Revit, I'm just going to go and export this model as a CAD file. I think you guys in this room hopefully already know this. As a DWG, there's a hidden little export setting that you have to change. It's under this ... when the export screen comes up. Under the ... you come down here to solids. It's totally hidden. Don't get me wrong. Like, you got to dig in. If you change it from polymesh to ACES solids, and then come back out and hit save, set, and close. Oh, that didn't do it. I got to go to next. See if this is still here. Okay. Okay. Next. Where do I want to save? And then just to show you what this looks like in Rhino, it's nice, clean. It's just a nice, clean, simple model made out of solid components. All the default settings on the import should work just fine in Rhino. And if I switch this over to shaded view, you can see it's got crappy colors on it, but everything is just a simple extrusion. It's really clean, really simple to use. Very easy to, say, throw into V-Ray if you wanted to do another kind of rendering, something other than Revit, do something more abstract in order to do diagrams over the top of. This would be a really simple way to start to diversify the kind of visual character of your presentations as you're coming out of Revit. It doesn't always just have to sit in Revit and do the boring-ass Revit renderings and Revit drawings, right? You can bring it into Rhino really simply, just apply simple materials. The layer structure is sort of okay. It's not perfect. It has a lot to do with families, and it has no logic. Things tend to float into layers that you don't expect them to, but it's relatively there, and if you start playing with it, you'll get a good sense of how it moves back and forth. Yes, sir?
So ultimately, with renderings from Rhino better than Revit, and I've been doing renderings in Revit, but
I think the thing about using Rhino and V-Ray to do renderings is that you can do the more abstract diagrammatic stuff. When you want to highlight things in 3D, when you want to create diagrams, V-Ray and Rhino render are going to be better. They're going to be simpler and just not so focused in terms of the material quality. The trouble is in order to do like shadows and things inside of Revit, you got to do the full Rhino, or excuse the full Revit. I'm going to confuse myself. The full Revit rendering. Too many R words. And so this is a nice way to just sort of like take the materiality out of it, or go. My favorite thing to do with something like this is to select it all and to do a make 2D, and and to basically not show hidden lines, just use the current view. This might blow up my computer, but it's a good challenge. It wasn't too bad. And you can get simple kinds of diagrams of the form that you're looking at. This is just a 2D thing, but you're looking at it in 3D. If you take the perspective out and turn it into a parallel view, you can basically make simple axonometrics. They're just 2D drawings. They're things that you can go and throw color into in Illustrator and really quickly use all the skills that you already have in terms of putting together simple diagrams and not feel like you're so locked into. You can't continue to feel like you're so locked into Revit's graphic kind of typology, right? And I don't know if you fourth years got a chance to go through the poster session that we had set up after the lecture on Wednesday, but the fifth years had, basically mostly Revit stuff up on the boards, and I think it was really vividly Revit stuff, right? Like it felt like most everything came out of Revit, and so I just want to make sure you guys know that you need to use the whole myriad of skills that you know how. The simplest way to get it out and start using it in a more robust way is to throw it into Rhino, and then you've got all these different ways that you can export it, turn it into 2D things, create hidden line things, create axons, all the stuff that you're accustomed to doing without having to like navigate all the complexity of Revit in order to do it. Okay. So I'm gonna, because I think we're running out of time, and you guys in fifth year I know you did some. I think I was gone that day, but you did some render and drawing stuff with Jeremy, right? Are you guys okay with where you are on that stuff in order to be able? Okay, so for the fourth years, I'm just going to make a separate video just to walk you guys through the render logic and the drawing logic, so that way you can do it at your own pace and not have to sit here in a lecture and watch it. So the other two things that I wanted to show are here. So Food for Rhino, if you've never been, Food for Rhino is basically a database, just a website that is collecting and keeps track of all of the up-to-date plugins for Rhino. So in the next week, as we wrap up the Revit portion of this semester, we're going to start transitioning into a lot of different of these open source plugins that have been built for Rhino in order to start getting into Arduinos and start transitioning into, in particular, Grasshopper and the fabrication project that we're going to do for the semester. And so I want to make sure that you guys know where this is, because it's the best repository for finding all of the different things that you may want. And in particular, while we're on this theme of transitioning between Rhino and Revit, you're going to want to know about two particular ones. One is called Hummingbird. And I'm actually going to go through this one, I think, next week. Hummingbird, it's not the cleanest thing, but it's relatively robust. Basically, what it does is it takes it goes back and forth. It goes both directions between Revit and Dynamo and Rhino and Grasshopper, and it basically converts all of your information in terms of the way that something is constructed in Grasshopper and turns it into a CSV. Anybody know what a CSV is? Yeah, it's a spreadsheet. It's called comma-separated values is what CSV. It's a dumb Excel spreadsheet. It'll open in Excel, but it doesn't have all the formatting. It's just literally each cell is separated by a comma, and that's why it's called comma-separated values. It's the simplest kind of database you can construct. So what Hummingbird does is it just exports a CSV with a very particular construction. And then on the Revit side, it's got another little plugin that knows how to read that spreadsheet. So because there's no file format that actually will take your script and move back and forth between the two yet, there should be soon, but right now there isn't yet. The way to do this is basically to have Grasshopper with Hummingbird export a CSV, and then to have the Hummingbird, there's another half of the plugin that operates on the Revit side that'll bring it back in and turn it into content. It sounds complex, but it's really relatively intuitive. You just have an output that creates a spreadsheet, and then an input that imports it and turns it back into geometry on the other side. The thing that I was sort of alluding to is this new version of Dynamo is all Python based, right? And Grasshopper is all Python based. That's just the scripting language, right? Now that they're both on the same language, we should theoretically start to see tools that actually allow for native movement between the two pieces of software. And hopefully things will start to clear themselves up relatively quickly. Python, it's just like C or Java. It's just new, it's much simpler and cleaner, and it has all the Rhino components have been written into it. And most of the Revit components are now being written into it, so that it's a single computer language, basically, that will allow you to, hopefully, eventually we'll be able to talk back and forth between the two pieces of software. The other one that you guys in this room have heard of, that Jason talked about, is Grevit. These really intuitive things. I don't know that a Grevit is an animal. I think it's just, if it is, it sounds hideous. Basically, this is the first version that's trying to use Python. I don't think it's as effective or as clean as using Hummingbird, but the GR is from Grasshopper and the Revit is from Revit. So it's Revit. Anyway, this one doesn't go to Dynamo. This one just goes straight into Revit from your Grasshopper model. In essence, it's a way of just translating the geometry pretty cleanly. It's as though the way you would think about this one is you write the script in Grasshopper and you get the product in Revit, right? Whereas the Hummingbird one is intended to allow you to literally go back and forth between Dynamo, potentially change the script in Dynamo, go back to Grasshopper, change the script in Grasshopper, go back to Dynamo. it doesn't really work like that, but that's the intention. This one is really just using Grasshopper for Revit. So it really doesn't engage Dynamo in the same kind of way.
How difficult is it, or what the sort of limits on making adjustments once you put it into Revit?
In essence, you go back to Grasshopper, change your script, and then dump it back into Revit again.
The parametric thing we did our Grasshopper script, they did exported it as a AC.
This is just a way of basically automating that connection. Yeah.
When we brought in the masses of the big services and stuff, it was kind of easier.
That's right. This should bring it in more intuitively as a set of families. So what Revit is doing is basically going to make a family that has the appropriate variations on it when it brings it into Revit. Then you could theoretically take that family, bring it in as I got to turn towards a set instance. That then you could go in and bring into Dynamo to start manipulating. But so it's a little bit better than just bringing in ACES solids, but in essence, it's just dumping in a Revit file with geometry. It is going to be better than that, and the parameters should be defined in the way that you define them in Grasshopper. If that makes sense. So those are the two easiest methods. Again, I'm gonna go through Hummingbird a little bit next week to give you a better sense. I really wanted to do a kind of trial here today with the hack of the. If you guys in 290 could see, we've hacked together the room here with the HDMI cable going across, and I'm not using the podium anymore in hopes that the video will work a lot better. I hope it is on your side. I can't hear you still, but whatever. One other thing that I wanted to show, if you guys have never seen this, is Section Cut. It's this weekly blog that these guys, I think they're sort of Michigan graduates, if I can infer that. They've basically been doing these weekly entry/podcasts that are, or they have a separate podcast that are really kind of compelling around very particular kinds of issues. A lot of the things that actually Greg Lynn was coming up with. The podcast is really well done, and like my favorite was down here. Where is it? A lot. I mean, you can see there's a lot of Akeem Menges, my favorite. Wes is more. So Wes McGee is the guy that runs the fabrication shop at Michigan, basically the kind of the robotics guy in architecture, and I love that. I love that phrase. Anyway, they held the Robotics and Architecture Conference at Michigan back in March. So this is a new thing. It was just held for the second time there, and it was really interesting to see him or to hear him kind of describe in the podcast. There's basically a longer interview with him. The sort of trajectory of where he sees things going. He's still hell bent on using the kind of catenaries and shell structures. So that's why it was really interesting to hear Greg sort of pushing back. They look so sad to me. I love that line. Like those catenaries, they look so sad. Like Gaudi, right? It does kind of look like Gaudi is sort of like dripping and like slouchy, right? Okay, anyway, so definitely you should check that out. I've really enjoyed it over the last couple of weeks and wanted to show it to you guys too. Yeah, that's it. That's the stuff I wanted to get to. Next week, actually, I think on Friday we'll just leave the labs open for answering questions and for helping you out with the bridge designs. So again, one more piece of homework to do the salon roof. And we'll do the roof of CCB on Monday in the lab, and then next Friday in lab, we'll just have a work day for you to work on the midterm that will now be due on Monday, the 27th. Okay? Cool. Thanks, guys.